Zalika had learned how to sleep with one eye open. The abandoned bus stop on the edge of Makonda City was her home, its cracked concrete cold even under the African sun. At 15, she was thin, barefoot, and wrapped in a torn shawl that once belonged to her mother. People passed her daily, whispering prayers or curses, clutching their bags tighter. To them, Zalika was not just homeless, she was dangerous. Rumors followed her like flies. They said her mother died mysteriously. They said strange things happened wherever Zalika stayed too long. Sick chickens, spoiled food, bad dreams. When a shop burned down near the market, fingers pointed at her. "Witch child," they hissed. Zalika kept quiet, holding her tears deep inside, remembering her mother's voice. "Your gift is not evil. Fear makes people blind." The trouble started on a crowded afternoon. A woman screamed when her son collapsed near the tomato stalls, shaking and foaming at the mouth. Panic spread like wildfire. Someone shouted Zalika's name. Another screamed, "She cursed him!" Before she could run, hands grabbed her, stones flew. The market that once ignored her now wanted blood. Dragged to the village square, Zalika knelt trembling. Elders argued loudly. Some demanded fire, others exile. She raised her head and whispered, "He needs water and leaves from the neem tree." Laughter erupted. "Listen to the witch," someone mocked. Still, one old woman hesitated, something in the girl's calm shaking her certainty. Across the city, glass towers rose above guarded gates. Billionaire Kato Mensah paced the marble floor of his mansion, fear hollowing his chest. His 8-year-old daughter, Amara, lay unconscious upstairs. Doctors had tried everything. Machines beeped uselessly. No diagnosis made sense. Money, for the first time, had no power. Kato had conquered industries, but was helpless before his child's shallow breaths. His wife had died years earlier, leaving Amara his only light. When the doctors quietly suggested preparing for the worst, something in him broke. He was ready to believe anything, try anyone, science, prayer, even whispers of the impossible. The old woman from the market, shaken by guilt, told a driver about the girl. The story reached Kato through unexpected channels. By nightfall, Zalika was pulled from a locked shed, still bruised, and brought to the mansion. Guards sneered. "This is the witch," one muttered. Standing by Amara's bed, Zalika felt a familiar warmth in her chest, the same feeling her mother once guided. She closed her eyes, ignoring the hatred in the room. She prayed softly, pressing her fingers to Amara's wrist. The air felt heavy. Then Amara coughed. A gasp followed. Silence shattered. Amara's eyes fluttered open. Machines began to change rhythm. Doctors rushed in, stunned. Kato fell to his knees, tears streaming freely. Zalika stepped back, exhausted, her legs shaking. She hadn't cast spells, she had only listened to something deeper than fear. But miracles invite enemies. Outside the mansion gates, word spread fast. A homeless girl, a witch, a healed child. Makonda City buzzed with disbelief, jealousy, and rage. As Zalika sat alone that night, staring at her dirty hands, she didn't know yet that this moment would change not just her life, but the fate of the entire city. By morning, Makonda City was awake with rumors sharper than knives. Radio hosts argued, bloggers speculated, and pastors preached warnings about false miracles. Some called Zalika a demon in disguise. Others whispered that God had chosen a beggar over the proud. Outside Kato Mensah's gates, crowds gathered, half praying, half demanding her arrest. Inside the mansion, Zalika sat quietly in borrowed clothes, unused to soft cushions and clean water. Kato watched her from across the room, torn between gratitude and fear. He believed what he saw, but belief didn't silence a city. When his head of security advised sending the girl away for her own safety, Kato hesitated, realizing how fragile miracles were in the hands of the frightened. A team of specialists flew in within hours. Tests were run again and again. Amara laughed, asked for mango juice, and held her father's hand. Every scan came back normal. The doctors exchanged uneasy glances. "Spontaneous remission," one finally said, unconvinced even as he spoke. They questioned Zelika harshly, her past, her mother, her methods. She refused to dress her gift in mystery. "I listen, I help." Their skepticism hardened into quiet resentment. When science had failed, a street girl had succeeded, and that bruised egos no money could soothe. That night, flames rose near the market again. This time, someone painted a symbol on the wall, a crooked circle blamed on witches. The crowd roared for justice. An elder declared that the city would never know peace while Zelika lived among them. Torches were lit. At the mansion, Kato watched the chaos on live news feeds. His gratitude turned to resolve. He ordered increased security and called a press conference. "The girl stays," he said firmly, "and anyone who harms her answers to me." Power, at last, chose a side. Unable to sleep, Zelika finally told Kato about her mother, how she healed with herbs and prayer, how fear killed her, not sickness, branded a witch, beaten, abandoned. Zelika's voice didn't shake as she spoke, but her eyes held storms. Kato listened, ashamed. He saw the pattern clearly now, ignorance dressed as righteousness. He promised her protection, but she shook her head gently. "I don't need walls," she said. "I need truth." The press conference exploded across the nation. Cameras flashed as Zelika stood beside Kato and Amara. "I am not a witch," Zelika said calmly. "I help because I was taught to." Her quiet strength unsettled the crowd more than shouting ever could. That night, letters began arriving, stories of sick children, desperate parents, broken hope. The miracle was no longer a secret, and as Makonda City held its breath, one truth became unavoidable. Fear was losing its grip, and a homeless girl was changing the world. The letters piled up faster than anyone expected. Some were neatly written on expensive paper, others scrawled in pencil on torn notebooks. Mothers begged for help, fathers offered money they didn't have. Kato's assistants tried to filter them, but Zelika stopped them. "Pain doesn't wait its turn," she said quietly. Kato arranged a small clinic in one of his unused buildings. Doctors protested, calling it reckless. Pastors warned it was deception. Still, the sick came. Zelika worked silently, guided by intuition and compassion. Some were healed, others weren't, but all left feeling seen. That alone unsettled the city's rigid beliefs. One boy did not recover. When he died 2 days later, grief turned to fury. His uncle stormed the clinic, accusing Zelika of stealing hope. "You choose who lives," he screamed. The crowd murmured. Doubt crept back in like a shadow. Zelika wept that night, blaming herself. Kato tried to comfort her, but she shook her head. "I don't control life," she whispered. "I only serve it." For the first time since Amara's healing, the miracle felt fragile, and the cost of faith unbearably heavy. A famous prophet arrived from the capital, commanding massive crowds. He declared Zelika a counterfeit, sent to confuse believers. His sermons were broadcast nationwide. Attendance at the clinic dropped overnight. Kato confronted him privately, but the prophet smiled. People fear what they can't control, and she cannot be controlled. The warning was clear. Power rarely bowed to truth. Security urged Zelita to leave the city. Arrangements were made quietly. A new identity, a safe place. Kato offered education, comfort, protection. It was everything she'd never had. Zelika stood at the gate at dawn, torn. Then she remembered her mother's last words. Run and fear wins. She turned back. If I leave, she said softly, they will burn another girl in my place. That evening the mob came again, larger, louder. Stones shattered glass. Fire licked the gates. Kato rushed Amara to safety as guards formed a line. Zelika stepped forward, raising her hands. "I forgive you," she shouted.
Went viral.
Her voice.
News stations replayed it endlessly. Human rights groups demanded investigations. The government, pressured by public fury, announced an inquiry into witchcraft-related violence. Makonda City became a symbol of national shame. Zelika watched from a distance, conflicted. Justice felt necessary, but hollow. Her mother would not return. Still, something important had shifted. Fear was finally being named for what it was: violence. A neuroscientist named Dr. Leora visited quietly. Instead of accusations, she asked questions. She observed Zelika's methods, tested her senses, and listened deeply. Her conclusion shocked many. Zelika had an extreme form of empathic perception, able to sense physiological distress early. "It's rare," Dr. Leora explained, "but not supernatural." The revelation calmed some, but angered others. Those who thrived on mystery hated clarity even more than miracles. Evidence surfaced of the prophet's financial scandals. Former followers spoke out. His empire crumbled quickly, exposed by the same media he once commanded. The city watched in stunned silence as a false authority collapsed. Zelika felt no triumph, only relief. Power had been challenged and lost. Cato announced the conversion of his abandoned properties into shelters and clinics run by trained professionals, with Zelika as a guide, not a symbol. He refused to brand her gift. "No miracles for sale," he said firmly. As the first shelter opened, Zelika stood at the doorway, remembering the bus stop she once slept under. For the first time, she stepped inside, not as a ghost of the streets, but as their voice. Living indoors felt strange to Zelika. Clean sheets, scheduled meals, and quiet nights unsettled her more than hunger ever had. She often woke before dawn, sitting by the window, half expecting someone to drag her out again. Cato noticed but didn't push. Healing, he knew, had layers. Amara followed Zelika everywhere, calling her big sister. Their laughter filled the mansion, softening spaces once ruled by grief. For the first time, Zelika allowed herself to imagine a future that wasn't measured in survival. The government inquiry stalled. Files disappeared. Witnesses recanted. Powerful figures feared exposure. Funding for shelters was suddenly delayed. Cato's lawyers warned him quietly. He was making enemies far above street level. Zelika felt the familiar pull of guilt. "This is because of me," she said. Cato shook his head. "This is because of truth," he replied. And truth, he explained, always costs someone their comfort. A teenage girl arrived at the clinic, beaten and accused, just like Zelika once was. She was too late. The girl died that night. Zelika broke down completely, screaming in grief and rage. "Why give me this gift if I can't save them all?" Dr. Leora stayed with her through the night, explaining something no one else had dared. Gifts don't erase evil, they expose it. The words didn't heal Zelika, but they steadied her. A foreign organization offered to take Zalika abroad, to study her, fund research, protect her. The contract was thick, the promises heavy. Cato read between the lines. Ownership disguised as opportunity. Zalika refused. "I won't become a project," she said. Her voice no longer shook when she spoke. A sudden court order shut down the shelters. Police arrived without warning. Patients were forced out. Cameras captured Zalika standing silently as sick children cried behind barricades. The nation watched, stunned. That night, Cato received a threat: stop or lose everything. He looked at Zalika and smiled grimly. "Then we burn the lies instead." Cato released documents he had quietly gathered, proof of officials protecting violent groups, misusing funds, silencing victims. The files exploded across media platforms. Protests erupted nationwide. Maconda City was no longer alone in its shame. Zalika watched the chaos unfold with mixed emotions. This fight was bigger than her now, yet she knew it had started because one girl refused to disappear. Arrests followed. Elder Badu testified again, this time in court. His voice no longer trembled. Survivors spoke openly for the first time. The courtroom overflowed. Outside, crowds demanded reform. Zalika testified last. She didn't dramatize. She told the truth plainly, about fear, about loss, about survival. When asked if she forgave them, she paused. "I'm learning," she said. The honesty stunned the room. One night, a car tried to run Zalika off the road. She survived with minor injuries. The message was clear: change would not come without blood. Security tightened, but fear returned, whispering old lies. Amara cried, begging her not to leave. Zalika held her close, realizing that love made courage heavier, but stronger. At a community meeting, someone asked what to call the movement forming around her. Zalika shook her head. "No names," she said. "Names become idols." Instead, she suggested a purpose: protect the vulnerable before fear finds them. The simplicity caught fire. Power went out across Maconda City during a massive protest. Fires threatened again, but this time people stood between the flames and the homes. No one burned, no one ran. From a rooftop, Zalika watched candles glow across the city. For the first time, darkness didn't win. Zalika asked Cato to take her back to the old bus stop. He hesitated, fearing the memories would reopen wounds, but she insisted. Standing on the cracked concrete, she felt the echoes of hunger, cold, and invisibility. Instead of pain, she felt grounding. This was where she had learned to listen. She knelt and whispered a prayer, not for herself, but for every child who still slept unseen. Closer, she realized, wasn't forgetting. It was standing where you were broken and not breaking again. Cato's companies began to suffer. Contracts were canceled. Investors fled. He was advised to apologize publicly and distance himself from Zalika. Instead, he doubled down, transferring his remaining wealth into independent trusts protected by law. "You can't scare me with poverty," he said calmly. "I've already been rich, and it didn't save my wife." Community leaders began organizing education forums about health, trauma, and fear-based violence. Attendance was small at first. Then it grew. Mothers who once threw stones now asked questions. Former accusers volunteered at shelters. Change arrived quietly, without spectacle, and because of that, it stayed. Zalika dreamed of her mother for the first time in years. She wasn't bleeding, she wasn't afraid. She smiled and said nothing. When she woke, she felt lighter, as if something unfinished had finally rested. She told Dr. Leora, who simply nodded. The mind heals in symbols, and yours is finally safe enough to sleep. Amara collapsed at school without warning. Panic returned like a flood. Doctors rushed her to the hospital. Zalika stood frozen, fear clawing her chest. What if it was luck? The question haunted her. But as she held Amara's hand, she listened again, calmly, deeply. This time, the answer was simple. It wasn't magic, it was knowledge. And it worked. An anonymous message reached Cato at dawn. End this now, or the girl disappears. There was no signature, no demand, only certainty. Cato showed it to Zalika, expecting fear. Instead, she exhaled slowly. They're running out of power. That's when they're most dangerous. Security plans were tightened, but Zalika refused to hide. If they erase me, she said, they think the story ends. It doesn't. A senior official requested a private meeting. He offered a deal: full protection, public honors, international backing, in exchange for Zalika stepping away quietly. No more clinics, no more testimony, no more influence. Zalika listened respectfully, then asked one question: who protects the next girl? There was no answer. The deal ended there. It happened in seconds. A blackout, screams. When the lights returned, Zalika was gone. The city erupted. Social media flooded. Protests reignited overnight. This time, rage was organized. Cato stood before cameras, voice steady but eyes burning.
Markets reopened without whispers. Children walked freely at dusk. The word witch faded from daily speech, replaced by something unfamiliar: questions. Zalika walked through the city unnoticed one afternoon, exactly as she liked it. Safety, she realized, was the freedom to be ordinary. For the first time in her life, Zalika experienced days without crisis. No mobs, no sirens, no urgent knocks at night. The quiet felt heavy, almost suspicious. She spent hours at the shelter garden, pressing her hands into the soil, reminding herself that peace didn't need permission to exist. Dr. Leora noticed the change and gently explained what Zalika was feeling. You lived in survival for so long, she said, that calm feels like danger. Zalika nodded. Healing, she learned, wasn't a single moment, it was learning how to stay. Cato officially stepped down as CEO of his remaining companies. The announcement shocked investors, but relieved him deeply. Wealth had once defined him. Now it felt like noise. He redirected his time toward mentoring young leaders and funding long-term education programs tied to the shelters. One evening, he told Zalika, losing money was easy. Losing fear, that took watching you. The student had become the teacher. International organizations invited Zalika to speak, not as a miracle, but as a case study in community healing. She traveled carefully, always returning home. In each city, she repeated the same message: fear thrives where knowledge is denied. Her words carried weight because they were lived, not rehearsed. She refused applause, asking instead for commitments, schools, clinics, laws that protected the accused. One afternoon, a letter arrived from a village far away. A woman wrote that years ago she had accused Zalika's mother and lived with the guilt ever since. She asked for forgiveness. Zalika cried as she read it. She wrote back simply, I forgive you. Teach your children not to repeat it. The circle at last began to close. At the old bus stop, a small plaque was placed quietly, for every child who was invisible and survived. Zalika traced the words with her fingers, smiling softly.
She no longer lived there, but she had not erased it either. Survival had become legacy. Just when the city seemed settled, reports arrived of children disappearing in remote neighborhoods. Panic gripped Makonda once more. Parents demanded answers. Zalika's first instinct was fear, but she pushed it down. She had learned that acting from panic solved nothing. She visited each family personally, observing patterns, listening to whispers of corruption and neglect. It became clear the shadows were not mystical, they were human, and they thrived where systems failed. Zalika convened the council she had formed. Doctors, social workers, volunteers, all present. They reviewed reports, planned interventions, and created emergency protocols. Zalika realized this was more than healing, it was governance, responsibility, and vigilance. For the first time, she felt the weight of her decisions fully. Protecting the vulnerable meant confronting bureaucracy, apathy, and human greed. But she also felt a quiet pride. Survival had taught her resilience. Leadership demanded courage. A journalist named Tay emerged as a staunch ally, risking threats to report truthfully. He had grown up near the markets, understanding fear and gossip firsthand. Together, he and Zalika created public awareness campaigns, ensuring no child's disappearance would be ignored again. Through him, Zalika realized allies could appear from the most unlikely corners. Trust, she learned, was not given, it was earned in action. Evidence eventually led to a powerful politician orchestrating the kidnappings to destabilize reform movements. When confronted, he tried to bribe, threaten, and intimidate. Zalika's response was simple. She exposed him publicly, along with the network that enabled him. The nation watched live as his empire crumbled. No miracles, no witchcraft, just truth, amplified by courage and persistence. Makonda City held its first public healing day. Children danced in the streets, parents hugged, survivors told their stories. Zalika stood quietly among them, smiling at small victories. Amara tongued her hand and whispered, "You made this possible." Zalika realized then that the miracle was never in her hands, it was in hearts learning to care, voices learning to speak, and a city learning to listen. Even after years of peace, Zalika received a cryptic note. Some truths are dangerous, beware the past. She studied it silently, recognizing the old patterns of fear and manipulation, but she no longer felt powerless. Years of surviving mobs, false accusations, and corruption had forged her into someone who could face threats calmly. She gathered her counsel and shared the note. Together, they traced its origin to a small network of extremists who had never forgiven the city's change. Plans were laid, but Zalika insisted on transparency. No fear, no secrets. In a shocking twist, one of the extremists turned informant. He revealed a hidden connection. The network had ties to the very people who once branded her mother a witch. The past, it seemed, had been influencing the present all along. Zalika listened, stunned but composed. She realized her mother's death was part of a larger system of fear, not isolated cruelty. This understanding didn't make the pain vanish, but it gave her purpose to finally dismantle a network entirely. With law enforcement and the council, Zalika orchestrated a citywide operation. Leaders of the extremist network were arrested, their influence ended. Makonda City's streets were alive with a quiet victory. No mobs, no fires, only relief. Standing among the recovered children, Zelika felt a mix of exhaustion and triumph. She had faced the city's fear, her own trauma, and the remnants of hatred, and prevailed without violence, without vengeance, simply with courage and clarity. Zelika returned to the shelter she had helped build. Children played, laughter echoing across halls once filled with cries. Records were archived, stories told, and lessons codified. The city had transformed. Fear no longer ruled in whispers or threats. It was named, studied, and defeated. Cato, older now and wiser, smiled at Zelika. "You've done what I never could," he said. "You've turned survival into legacy." Years later, a bronze statue of Zelika stood quietly in the center of Makonda City, not as a witch, not as a miracle, but as a reminder. The plaque read, "For every child who was invisible and survived to change the world." Zelika, now a young woman, watched from afar with Amara at her side. The city thrummed with life, education, and compassion. She felt the wind on her face, the same wind that had once carried whispers of fear. Now it carried hope. And in that moment she understood fully. The girl accused of witchcraft had healed more than a billionaire's daughter. She had healed an entire city, and nothing would ever erase her story.